Welcome back to the deep dive. You guys ready to get a little weird today?
I think weird is our default setting at this point.
That's fair. But today we're going even deeper, exploring tantric sex and this whole semen retention thing.
It's definitely a fascinating intersection of ancient wisdom and modern trends.
You're telling me. Our source material for this deep dive is a conversation between a Harvard psychiatrist, Dr. K, and a urologist, Dr. Raina Malik.
And Dr. K brings a really interesting perspective to the table, having spent time as a monk.
Right, which adds this whole other layer to the discussion. But before we get too deep, let's set the stage a bit. What exactly is Tantra?
Well, at its core, it's a philosophy that views everything, even sex, as a potential path to spiritual growth and enlightenment.
So it's not just about, positions and techniques.
Not at all. It's about transforming those experiences into something more, connecting to a deeper level of consciousness.
Okay, I'm intrigued. But where does all this talk about meditation and no-mind states fit in?
That's where it gets really interesting. Dr. K breaks down meditation using 3 Sanskrit words: dhyana, dhyana, and samadhi.
Hold on, 2 dhyanas. Is that a typo?
Not a typo, just the beauty of Sanskrit. The first dhyana refers to the actual technique of focusing, like using a mantra or, those prayer beads.
So it's the active part, the doing.
Exactly. And then the second dhyana is the meditative state you reach, that altered state of consciousness. Like when you finally drift off to sleep, you can't force it. It just kind of happens when the conditions are right.
Uh-huh. And samadhi is what, like the next level?
Exactly. It's an even deeper, more transcendent state. Dr. K describes it as a blissful, no-mind state, similar to being totally absorbed in a beautiful sunset.
Or even during orgasm, as Dr. K points out. Okay, I'm starting to see where this is going.
And that's where this idea of an illumin comes in. It's like a focal point that helps you focus your attention during meditation.
So anything can be an illumin, like a candle flame, a sound, or...
Exactly. And Dr. K suggests that the intensity of sex makes it a particularly powerful illumin.
So you're saying sex can actually be a tool for achieving a higher state of consciousness?
That's the essence of tantric sex. It leverages that intense focus using the no-mind state of orgasm as a pathway to samadhi.
Whoa, okay. But how does that actually work in practice?
Well, there are specific yogic techniques within tantric sex designed to prolong orgasm and delay ejaculation.
Wait, so you're aiming for orgasm without ejaculation? What's the point of that?
It's about reaching what Dr. K calls a sweet spot, prolonging and intensifying the experience to potentially tap into that no-mind state more fully.
So it's about way more than just the physical act.
Absolutely. And traditional tantric sex actually adds a whole spiritual dimension.
Like what, chanting and stuff?
Exactly. It often involves chanting mantras with a partner, sometimes for extended periods, making it a truly ritualistic and spiritual experience.
Mantras during sex, huh? That's wild. Dr. K also mentioned something called bija. What's that all about?
Ah, yeah, bia are specific types of mantras used in these practices. There are these seed syllables believed to hold potent vibrations that can enhance the spiritual experience.
So it's like adding another layer of energetic connection.
You could say that, but how does all this ancient stuff relate to what we see today, with trends like No Nut November?
Yeah, good point. They both seem to be about semen retention, but the motivations are pretty different, right?
Right. Tantric sex aims for spiritual exploration, while No Nut November tends to focus on perceived physical or mental benefits.
Like boosting willpower or energy levels. But Dr. Malik, the urologist, brought up some concerns about the potential downsides of this modern approach to semen retention.
Yeah, she was talking about potential negative impacts like pelvic floor issues, especially when people approach it from a place of, force or stress. It's about being mindful and listening to your body.
That's a good reminder. But Dr. K also talks about the benefits of tantric sex and celibacy, dividing them into physiological, neuroscientific, and spiritual categories.
He talks about how celibacy, especially when combined with yogic practices, seems to enhance his meditation.
And he even speculates that reduced testosterone might play a role, mentioning siddhasana, these yogic postures that are thought to suppress sex hormone production.
It's interesting, but we have to remember that the research on actual hormonal effects is still pretty mixed.
So it might be more about how those practices make you feel during meditation rather than some universal hormonal shift.
Exactly. It's all about personal experience. But let's get into the neuroscience stuff. Dr. K talks about the power of impressions and how they affect the subconscious.
He said that in a no-mind state, like during orgasm, impressions can really sink in deep.
Right, and he even links this to the release of oxytocin during sex, that bonding hormone. And it's fascinating how he contrasts this with the experience of sex workers who train themselves to detach from that bond.
It highlights the power of the mind to shape our experiences, even with something as primal as sex.
It's incredible. But he does caution against using standard mindfulness techniques right after sex, especially for people who've experienced trauma.
Right, because it could potentially bring up those painful memories, so what's the alternative?
He suggests exploring grounding techniques or sensory experiences that bring you back to the present moment.
Got it. Now let's dive into celibacy. Dr. K uses this Sanskrit word brahmacharya, which he says means to dwell in Brahman, the infinite.
Right, so it's not just about abstaining from sex. It's about cultivating non-lustfulness, a state of inner peace and detachment from desire.
So like not being ruled by those cravings, but being okay with them.
Exactly. It's about shifting your focus from external gratification to internal fulfillment. But here's the thing. Dr. K emphasizes that forcefully suppressing desire totally misses the point.
Because your mind is still consumed by it, so it's not about white-knuckling it.
Not at all. He suggests that through consistent meditation, the detachment happens naturally.
Like it becomes effortless.
Something like that. He uses this great analogy about choosing between glasses of water at different temperatures. If you're attached to a specific temperature, you get upset if you don't get your preferred one.
But as you practice detachment, that disappointment fades. That's a really helpful image.
Right. It shows how cultivating inner peace allows us to navigate life with more ease and acceptance. But forcing abstinence isn't the way to achieve that peace, is it?
So if suppressing those desires isn't the answer, what is?
Well, stay tuned for part 2 to find out. Welcome back. So before we took that deep dive into all things brahmacharya and no-mind states, we were talking about Dr. K's idea of sublimation, channeling that sexual energy instead of just trying to shut it down.
Yeah, like turning those desires into something productive, like, I don't know, building a hydroelectric dam or something.
Exactly. It's about harnessing that energy rather than just constantly battling it. And speaking of battles, we were talking about those online communities like NoFap that are all about quitting porn.
Yeah, and how those communities can be helpful, not necessarily because of the abstinence itself, but because they offer support in breaking those addictive cycles.
Right. It's about recognizing the power those things can have over us and finding healthier ways to relate to them. So it's not about demonizing sex or pleasure, but about understanding their impact on our minds and well-being.
That's a good point. It's all about finding that balance. But does Dr. K think this whole tantric philosophy is actually relevant to us today? Like, can we really apply these ancient ideas to our modern lives?
He totally does. He actually thinks they're incredibly relevant, especially when it comes to understanding the connection between our physical, mental, and spiritual selves.
Okay, but how? Give me an example.
Well, take the idea of using sex as a path to a higher state of consciousness. That might sound pretty out there to some people, but it highlights the possibility of transforming even the most ordinary parts of our lives into opportunities for growth.
So it's like finding the sacred in the everyday, right?
Exactly. And this whole brahmacharya thing, cultivating non-lustfulness, has applications that go way beyond just sexuality. It speaks to that universal challenge of managing our desires in a world that's constantly telling us to want more, buy more, be more.
It's like we're drowning in temptation. So learning to filter out that noise seems like a pretty valuable skill these days.
Absolutely. It's about becoming more mindful of what we're consuming, both physically and mentally, and choosing to focus on what truly nourishes us. And that brings us back to the importance of meditation, that whole no-mind thing we were talking about earlier.
Right, like it's training your mind to be calmer, clearer, and more focused. But do you have to become a monk to experience those benefits?
Of course not. While Dr. K's journey is unique, the principles he shares are applicable to everyone. We all have the potential to tap into that inner stillness and find greater peace and fulfillment.
That's really empowering. It's like we have this incredible capacity for growth within us.
We absolutely do. This whole conversation is about recognizing that potential and finding ways to nurture it.
I love that. This deep dive is really reminding us that self-discovery is an ongoing journey. We're always evolving and changing, and it's okay to embrace that.
Exactly. It's about being open to new perspectives, challenging our assumptions, and discovering what works for us as individuals. And speaking of discovering what works, let's shift gears and talk about some practical takeaways that our listeners can apply to their own lives.
Okay, hit me with some wisdom. What's the most important thing we can learn from Dr. K and all this tantric stuff?
One of the biggest takeaways is aligning your actions with your intentions, especially if you're interested in exploring practices like semen retention or celibacy. It's crucial to ask yourself why you're drawn to them.
So, like doing a little soul searching and making sure your motivations are coming from a genuine place.
Exactly. Ask yourself, are you doing this because of societal pressure, shame, or some desire to conquer your body? Or are you coming to it from a place of genuine curiosity and self-exploration?
It's about being honest with yourself and making choices that feel authentic. I love that.
Right. It's not about following someone else's rules. It's about finding what feels right for you.
Yeah.
And remember, transformation takes time. It's not about forcing anything. It's about creating the right conditions, both internally and externally, and allowing the growth to happen organically.
Like planting a seed and giving it the space and nourishment to blossom. So, what else can we do to nurture that growth?
Well, Dr. K talks a lot about finding healthy ways to manage your desires. And we've talked about sublimation, right? Channeling that energy into something creative, something meaningful, or something that helps others.
So if you're feeling that surge of energy, maybe write a song, volunteer at a local charity, or even just go for a run. Anything that feels aligned with your values.
Exactly. It's about expressing yourself authentically and maybe even contributing to something bigger than yourself. And remember, it's perfectly normal to experience desire. It's part of being human. The key is to observe it without judgment, understand its roots, and then choose how you want to respond.
It's like turning those desires into teachers, right?
Yeah.
Showing us something about ourselves and what we truly value.
Exactly. And mindfulness can be a powerful tool in this process. But remember Dr. K's caution about using standard mindfulness techniques right after sex, especially if trauma is part of your story.
Because it could unintentionally trigger those painful memories. So what's a better approach?
He recommends grounding techniques or sensory experiences that can help calm the mind and bring you back to the present moment.
Things like taking a walk in nature, listening to calming music, or doing some gentle stretches.
Exactly. And remember, mindfulness isn't just about sitting on a cushion and meditating. It's about bringing that awareness to every aspect of your life.
So being present in even the most mundane moments. That's a beautiful challenge.
It is. It's about noticing your thoughts and feelings without getting swept away by them. Just observing them with curiosity and compassion. Now let's talk about those nocturnal emissions. It's something that comes up a lot when people are exploring semen retention.
Yeah, it's a common experience, and it can be a source of shame for some people.
Yeah.
But Dr. K doesn't see it that way, does he?
Not at all. He normalizes them as a natural physiological process, especially for younger folks. It's nothing to be ashamed of.
It's just the body doing its thing. No need to overthink it.
Right. Our bodies have their own wisdom and rhythms. Trying to control every little thing just creates unnecessary stress.
It's about finding that balance between discipline and acceptance. So, as we wrap up this part of our conversation, what are some key reminders for our listeners?
Well, first and foremost, self-discovery is a deeply personal journey. There's no right or wrong way to do it. It's about honoring your own unique path and trusting your inner wisdom. And remember, be patient with yourself. Transformation takes time.
And it's not always linear. There will be ups and downs, twists and turns along the way, but that's part of the adventure, right?
Exactly. And remember, you are not alone on this journey. There are so many resources available, including teachers, communities, and of course, podcasts like this one.
Don't be afraid to reach out for support when you need it. We're all in this together. This is a good moment to pause and reflect on what's resonating with you. What are you taking away from this conversation? How are you feeling?
Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Man, we've been exploring some pretty wild concepts today, from tantric sex to semen retention, the power of desire, all that good stuff.
It's been quite the journey. We've gone from ancient Eastern philosophy to modern neuroscience and everything in between.
And through it all, I think the biggest takeaway is that this is a personal journey, right? It's about figuring out what works for you and approaching these topics with a sense of curiosity and self-compassion.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all approach here. So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's distill some of those key takeaways, leave you with some food for thought as you continue exploring all this on your own.
Sounds good to me. You know, one thing that really stuck with me was Dr. K's emphasis on shifting from a mindset of conquest to one of sublimation. It's not about denying those desires, but understanding them, working with them, maybe even using them as fuel for something positive.
It's such a powerful shift, like we were talking about earlier. Instead of trying to dam up that river of desire,
Yeah.
we learn to harness its energy, Like those hydroelectric plants you mentioned?
Exactly. And it's not just about sex, right? This applies to any area of life where we're struggling with a strong desire, whether it's food, social media, work, whatever. Instead of beating ourselves up for having those desires, we can ask ourselves, how can I channel this energy into something positive?
That's a game changer right there.
Mm.
And it ties back to another key takeaway from this conversation, which is that our relationship with desire, especially sexual desire, is deeply connected to our mental and spiritual well-being.
Yeah, Dr. K's experience as a monk really highlights how practices like meditation and celibacy can help cultivate a calmer, clearer, more peaceful mind.
It's like those practices create space for inner peace to emerge. But that doesn't mean we all have to shave our heads and move into a monastery to experience those benefits.
Definitely not. But even if those specific practices aren't for everyone, the underlying principles are still super relevant. It's about learning to observe our thoughts and emotions without judgment, understanding where they come from, and then choosing how we want to respond.
It's about becoming more conscious and intentional in every aspect of our lives.
Right. Remember that analogy Dr. K used about building an internal filter for all the ads and temptations we're bombarded with? That really resonated with me. It's about developing that inner strength and wisdom to navigate the chaos of the modern world.
And not getting swept away by every little craving or impulse. It's about reclaiming our power and choosing what truly matters to us.
So much good stuff to ponder. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a final question. How might your own relationship with desire, particularly sexual desire, be influencing your overall well-being?
It's a great question. Are there ways you can shift your perspective? Can you learn to work with those desires, to harness their energy and channel it towards something that feels meaningful and fulfilling for you?
Those are great questions to reflect on. And remember, self-discovery is a continuous journey. It's full of twists and turns, ups and downs. It's not always pretty or straightforward.
But that's the beauty of it. It's a process of growth and evolution. It's about embracing the messiness and learning as we go.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you for joining us on this incredible deep dive into the world of tantric sex and semen retention.
We hope you found it insightful, thought-provoking, and maybe even a little bit inspiring.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. We'll see you on the next episode of The Deep Dive.